Week 4, Unit 7, Exercise 1. Details of the conduct of everyday life can be found, for example, in the diaries of remarkable mid-17th century individuals such as Samuel Pepys and John Evelyn, whose images of London daily life still capture the imagination. But the daily lives recorded in their diaries are certainly not in any sense representative of the society they describe, if only because the very act of keeping a diary renders the diarists themselves remarkable. In addition, the earliest diaries were simple, free-form records of sequences of activities, often without detailed reference to timings. This makes it impossible to accurately calculate the aggregate time spent in different activities. The application of diaries to systematic social research depends on collecting carefully harmonized daily activity reports in large samples selected randomly from a population. Sociologists, economists, and demographers can use the results of such time-use studies to describe and explain the factors that influence the chains of behaviors which comprise daily life. Exercise 2. Nature is changing with the explosive growth in urban populations, and cities have to deal with transformations in nature. While it pays too much attention to technology, smart cities research barely gives a nod to climate change, which is already influencing urbanites with more intense storms, flooding, record-breaking temperatures resulting from the emission of greenhouse gases and burning forests. As I write this in the summer of 2018, intense heat has made the season unbearable and often life-threatening for millions of city dwellers. Moreover, drought endangers the habitability of more of the Earth's surface. Unprecedented fires are burning across California and British Columbia. Monumental floods have drowned hundreds and made climate migrants of millions in India's Kerala state, and a rare hurricane has pounded Hawaii. The first wave of what most experts believe will be catastrophic climate change appears to have arrived. Exercise 3. If your brain thinks you're starving, it will eventually wear you down, no matter how strong your resolve. The solution is to give it the cues it needs to realize you aren't starving. The most straightforward way to do this is to choose foods that send strong satiety signals to the brainstem but contain a moderate number of calories. These are foods that have a lower calorie concentration, higher protein and or fiber content, and a moderate level of tastiness. This tends to include simple foods that are closer to their natural state, such as fresh fruit, vegetables, potatoes, fresh meats, seafood, eggs, yogurt, whole grains, and beans. Bread is surprisingly calorie-dense even when it's made from whole grain, so it can be easy to overeat. It may be preferable to get your starch from water-rich foods like potatoes, sweet potatoes, and beans rather than flour-based foods like bread and crackers. And foods based on white flour in particular, which tend to have a high calorie density and low fiber content, are definitely off the menu. Exercise 4. A number of fictional Stone Age accounts, especially from the first 3 decades of the 20th century, portray children in the active role of innovator and inventor. The basic formula of children as implementers of ideas and inventors of material culture is found in a variety of tales about the first fish spear, flint saw, bow and arrow, boat, taming of fire, and cooking meat, and so forth. Another common theme in Paleolithic fiction is children successfully domesticating animals, most often wolves and horses. Frequently, the act of taming leads to more significant contributions, such as helping a struggling people find food or hunt animals in new ways. For instance, in Malu's Wolf, the main character tames a wolf who later finds an elusive herd of mammoths upon which the group depends. The interesting twist in this story is the fact that Malu is a girl, which is quite rare. Like the boys, she is allowed to use a spear thrower and participate in an initiation ceremony in the Painted Cave. Exercise 5 and 6. Many local moves make an important contribution to maintaining older people's independence and raising their quality of life. With more than 1/5 of the population of most developed countries now aged 60 or more, and many in their 50s having retired, and average life expectancy close to 80 years of age, clearly old age can extend for decades and be a substantial fraction of a person's life. It is a life course stage of many changes. Early in retirement, some move to more attractive environments where they can pursue non-work interests, and others move to smaller homes or to live nearer their children and grandchildren. At older ages, many experience losses in health, vigor, partners, and income, and become no longer able to afford or drive a car, to climb stairs, to maintain a large garden, or mow the smallest lawn, and to walk to and from shops. Several of these changes seriously impair an older person's or couple's quality of life, but can be improved by a move to a more convenient home or location. One can say that impaired personal mobility encourages residential mobility. Some move to housing schemes designed for older people, for the surveillance or support they provide, or to enjoy more personal security. Population geographers have made substantial contributions to understanding the role of migration in older people's lives, but the work has been selective, and local moves and housing adjustments have been neglected. There is immense scope for more collaboration between geographers and gerontologists in understanding the role of residential mobility in older people's lives. Exercise 7. In comparing different subway car layouts, we can see how seemingly small design choices can have outsized effects on user behavior. The position of a subway car's doors, for example, shapes how riders use that space. When designers position doors symmetrically, riders will often crowd around the door, leaving much of the car unused. When designers choose to position the doors asymmetrically, however, use of the space is more evenly distributed. Passengers can enter and exit the car more efficiently. In these cases, the affordance of both layouts are the same. Riders in both environments are afforded the opportunity to use the whole space of the car to sit, stand, and ride. But by changing the location of the doors, designers can reshape riders' perceptions of that space, which influences how and whether riders take advantage of this affordance. By moving the position of the subway car doors, in other words, designers can use the power of the built environment to shape rider behavior, getting riders to do something they would not otherwise do. Exercise 8. In 1958, the American political scientist Edward Banfield advanced an influential thesis that attributed southern Italy's lower level of prosperity to stronger family ties in the region. He argued that more intense family ties diminished trust outside of one's kinship group, weakened cooperation in pursuit of a common public goal, and thereby reduced the level of economic prosperity in the region. In line with his thesis, recent evidence suggests that kinship ties do indeed differ significantly across Italian regions, as they do more generally across countries. Likewise, tighter nuclear family bonds do tend to adversely affect levels of social trust, political participation, the status of women in the workforce, and geographic mobility. And since, as the Nobel Prize-winning American economist Kenneth Arrow noted, business deals often rely on trust while its absence harms trade, lower levels of trust outside of the family setting might have diminished the level of economic development in southern Italy compared to the north. Exercise 9. Essentially, water is an inexhaustible source because once the water is used to produce electricity, it is usually returned to its original river or reservoir. Because of this, hydropower has great potential now and also into the future. Only 20% of hydroelectric potential has been developed within the United States. Tapping into this potential, however, is often hindered by unsuitable terrains and large distances from needing communities. In addition, future projects do not necessarily require new locations or dams. Only 2,400 out of 80,000 dams in the U.S. currently produce electricity from hydroelectric power plants. Many of these existing dams could have advanced technologies installed to produce energy and increase efficiency. A study performed by the U.S. Department of Energy calculated that it would cost approximately $1,600 per kilowatt to add turbines to dams that currently lack electricity capabilities. With this data and the amount of potential future locations for hydroelectric power plants, the cost to retrofit the existing dams would be able to pay for themselves in just a short time. However, these attempts are complicated by the push for additional dam removals by local and national environmental groups. Exercise 10. It sometimes happens that the many make a worse decision than the individual. Collective intelligence has its counterpart, collective stupidity. In groups, our capacity for good judgment can be severely reduced. In his studies on group norms, the psychologist Solomon Asch long ago addressed many well-known instances of this phenomenon. To name one, if a majority of people embrace a manifestly false and idiotic theory, others will go along with it merely because of the power of conformity. To name another instance, the false virtues of brainstorming. Take a group of 10 people and make them work together for half an hour on a project, like tourism slogans to promote a town, for example. At the same time, set another group to work in which each member works separately on the task. Gather up their reports. The proposals of the second group are much richer and more plentiful than the proposals of the first group. Put another way, sometimes the whole is less than the sum of its parts. Exercise 11 and 12. In 1970, the Danish economist Esther Bosserup hypothesized that variations in present-day attitudes towards the role of women in the workforce were a product of methods of cultivation in the pre-industrial era. Her argument was that owing to differences in the nature of the soil and the prevailing crops across regions, farmers in some areas cultivated their fields with hoes and rakes, whereas in others they used plows harnessed to horses or oxen. Since using a plow and controlling the animals that pull it requires massive upper body strength, men have had a significant physiological advantage over women in plowing, and women in these regions have been limited to housework during the course of human history. It was largely the suitability of land for the use of the plow, Bosserup argued, that led to the division of labor along gender lines. Evidence from agricultural societies across the world supports Bosserup's argument. Areas that use the plow have consistently had a greater division of labor within the household. Men have been predominantly engaged in agriculture, whereas women have been mainly confined to housework. In regions that made use of hoes and rakes, meanwhile, men and women have tended to share the farm work, from land preparation to sowing and harvesting, as well as other tasks such as ferrying water, milking cows, or collecting firewood, although most household work has remained predominantly in the domain of women.